Good evening and welcome to Punished for Protecting. We have both a live Facebook feed going right now and a very amazing story that we had to get on right away. I actually moved her up the queue. Her name is Nina Thompson. This brave mother is coming forward tonight, and I am so encouraged by her amazing story, and you should be too. Part of Punished for Protecting is to also encourage you, not just to tell all the horror stories that are happening across our country. We do this to raise awareness of what our courts and CPS are actually doing in our country. And what they're doing is not protecting children. Absolutely the extreme opposite is what's happening. And tonight, I have a very special guest, like I said, Nina Thompson. She's going to tell her story. It is, whenever I hear this and I interview somebody new, it's always the same. My story is the worst. My county is the worst. Our county is the most corrupt. Let me tell you, it's all corrupt. When I heard her story, you're going to see what I mean, just how bad it really was. And we're thankful that she's protected. I also want to say that Nina has taken her wonderful self that she is, and with her church, and she recently began got involved in a domestic violence ministry. So she's taken the victim and she's turned it into a victory, and that's what we want to do. So here we go, Nina. I'm going to switch over to Nina now.
Hi, Francesca. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome, and we're so thankful to have you. I'd like you to just first go ahead and maybe just let our viewing audience know exactly, what has happened and with your story and what has happened with your family.
Right. Yeah, so my name is Nina Thompson, and I am the proud mother of twins, and they're just amazing. One of the twins is autistic, and the other one, for a while, they thought she might be, and we're proud to say it's just some ADHD. And for about, 7-8 years, I was the victim of pretty severe domestic violence. And like most domestic violence victims, I was so psychologically tortured by my abuser, I didn't even realize how bad it was until I had to write this 20-page history document of all the bad things that had happened. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and also one of the bravest things I've ever done. The abuse had started early on in our relationship, and one of the first times he had ever struck me, he was intoxicated, and we were in an argument over something silly, like, believe it or not, wedding cakes. I had owned a bakery, and he came in and was drunk and left a wet turkey inside of one of the bakery refrigerators. It bled all over the wedding cakes, and obviously I was upset. This was a week's worth of work, and he started to smash my head into the butcher block of the bakery, and then eventually fell to the floor, and he broke chipped my teeth, cracked my nose, my eye socket. In that one, I still have a vein that sticks out on that side, and I think from that one, but I'm not sure, there's a vein and sort of a dent on the front of my head. And it didn't get any better from there. And I kept thinking, because I'm a person of faith, that I could fix this. I didn't know anything about alcoholism. I didn't know anything about domestic violence and the psychological patterns that happen with that. I just knew that I was being threatened nonstop. And this was about, at the time we were engaged, and this was about 4 months before the wedding. About 2-3 weeks later was the engagement party, and he beat me that night at a hotel in San Francisco. And the San Francisco Police Department came because the neighbors at the hotel had heard my screams, and that was my engagement party. And people always ask me, why did you marry him? Why did you have children with him? He was literally threatening my life. And I remember that night when the police had come, he had told me not to say anything or he would kill me. And there's a police record of the call. And I finally realized, I'd called up the police department to get a copy of that record. And it's really interesting. What a lot of people don't know is the Department of Justice can access those records through something called the NCIC, I believe is what it's called, or the NIC system. I had no idea. I had worked for the phone company. How would I know what that was? And after about 3 to 5 years on average at most police departments, those call records that show that history drop off, but the DOJ actually has access to them. So it's a really interesting thing, because one of the biggest things I'm advocating for is that to make it mandatory, make it a federal mandate, that all judges should consider the NCIC records of both parental units, depending on what the relationship is. But in my case, I had absolutely no idea there was a record of it. And the beatings continued. One of the worst ones was in a marble foyer in downtown San Francisco. He had beat me there, and I have a 2-inch dent on the top of my head that has never gone away. I lost all memory for about 3 weeks after that incident. And eventually the drinking subsided. I thought we had fixed the problem. And I thought, gosh, you know, I'd fixed it. And again, he'd never really stopped drinking. I just didn't know he was hiding it. And had decided to have children with him. And I remember, I mean, just the numerous incidences that still continue to happen, but I blocked them out. I don't remember sitting hidden in a closet, but my friends did. And my friends kept the text messages, and my friends kept the police calls, and they kept the pictures of the beatings and things that had happened. Eventually I decided to have children with him, which was one of the worst things I could have ever done. But I thought it was my last chance to have kids. And I was so psychologically manipulated back then, I didn't even realize it. And I'd gone out and we'd gotten pregnant through IVF. The moment he found out it was twins, he asked me to immediately terminate them. And about 5.5 months in, we found out that through amniocentesis, that the kids were positive for what's called a balanced Robertsonian translocation at chromosomes 14 and 15. If you ever look that up, it means that the kids will probably not live. If they do live, they have severe birth defects. And it was devastating news. I was 5.5 months pregnant, and I just kept putting my faith in God. And I kept saying, I know this isn't your will. I just knew that these kids were going to be okay. And my respondent in this particular case had said, I think you should terminate. And I just knew that wasn't God's will. I just knew it. And one day he had me go out and go for a walk. And the first time he had tried to have me shot, they made it look like a robbery. And I didn't believe that I thought it was actual robbery until we put all the things together. It wasn't a robbery, and the details are on there. It was a targeted hit. It was about a week before the wedding. And the night of the wedding, he had beaten me. I was locked into a bathroom until about 3 a.m. And he said if I didn't marry him the next day, that he would have me killed. And the hotel concierge was a witness as well. And the makeup artist had to hide the bruises, and the photographer knew. And one of my dearest friends, she also knew, and she had seen the abuse firsthand. She had actually witnessed him hurting me. And fast forward to one day, I'm 5.5 months pregnant, about a week after it found out about their potential diagnosis. He had me go for a walk in the property behind our house. And the property is an open land spot. And a lot of people go back there and go shooting. And at least they used to. The city of Rockland, California had banned it, but people still went out there and occasionally went shooting. And I hadn't heard it very frequently, but every now and then. And these two guys were out there shooting. He had me put on a bright red vest and had me go for a walk. And I remember thinking it was too warm to be wearing a vest. You know, it was October, it was still warm there. And he was way, way, way behind me. And all of a sudden I'm in this open clearing, and I could hear bullets whizzing past my head. And I dropped to the ground, and I was yelling back at him, oh my God, they're shooting at us, they're shooting at us. And these two guys walked away, and I could tell you exactly what they looked like. I can tell you exactly the car that they had, and I called up 911. And I remember looking back, and he was laughing. And I'm down on the ground. I'm 5.5 months pregnant with twins, and I'm down on the ground, and I called 911. I called, and the call got routed from my Verizon phone to CHP, and then got routed over to City of Rockland. And they came out and took a report. And again, what most people don't know is that, and this was in, I believe, 2009, October of 2009. And, you know, he took the report, didn't think anything of it. And I actually thought it was an accident because I was still in that psychological, sorry.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to just emphasize that one portion. The police thought nothing of it. Is that what
I think that's part of the problem is that, you know, you don't
know that.
We really did. They had said they were the ones that told me, you know, people go out there and, you know, go shooting. And I didn't think, you know, I was so psychologically twisted. I really didn't think it was him. And it was my attorney that said, you do realize he was trying to have you shot, right? And I was so naive and so psychologically wrapped up in it. It didn't even occur to me until a while later. And I went, oh my gosh, he was.
Well, the 5-month-old pregnant woman on the floor and her husband laughing after a gunshot, that in and of itself, even if it wasn't Hunter that made a mistake, is a little bit.
There were two people, and these guys were pros. They were not, it was not an accident. These were people who, yeah, it really was. And it was really an interesting description. I have it in that document that I shared with you, and I'm happy to share it with the public. When I was at about 7.5 months pregnant, what I did not know was that he was still going through a divorce from his first wife, where there were, I believe, 6 arrest records with San Joaquin County, California. And I believe 2 EPOs granted in that particular case. She had gone to the hospital on multiple occasions. The arrest records in that particular case, unregistered weapons were seized, and on each of the occasions, alcohol use or substance abuse was involved. And I had no idea about any of it, absolutely any of it. And it turns out when I was about 7.5 months pregnant, he was found in contempt of court. He had done the same thing. He had dragged it out through the San Joaquin County court system, and he is still in contempt of court in that court system as well. I mean, this is a master manipulator of the court system. And he was found in contempt of court and almost went to jail that day, and was ordered to pay her $350,000. He came home that day, and we still had not decorated the children's room. He refused to allow me to do it. And when I came up to him, and as calmly as I'm speaking to you now, I walked up to him and asked him, can we get some cribs for the kids? And it was the day of that court hearing that I didn't know at the time. And he turned around and put me into a chokehold. And my neighbor came over, and I was 7.5 months pregnant. And she came over. We called the police department. And a little while later, I had the kids. And I think there was a beating or two that happened in between there. But at that point, I was so excited about the children. At 8 months, I found out that they were going to be fine, and that their diagnosis, they still have the chromosomal abnormality, but it wasn't manifesting in them. It will manifest in their children, but not in them. And so had the kids, nearly died, believe it or not. Started to bleed out, and nearly died having them, and they were perfect, and they were just beautiful. And I knew that I had seen God's will. And woke up a couple hours later, didn't die, scared everyone in the hospital quite a bit, but didn't die. And the babies were perfect and beautiful. And about 3 weeks later, the respondent had gone out and gone drinking, and it was St. Patrick's Day. And historically, on any major holiday, there was always severe violence. Without a doubt, it was predictable. And
especially St. Patrick's Day, it's the biggest drinking day of the year.
Well, for the respondent in this particular case, every day was a big day.
Well, yeah.
And continued to drink at absolutely epic proportions, unheard of. When I tell people he would literally have up to 48 drinks in one night. His tolerance level, yeah, literally, and his tolerance level was unbelievable. And when I tell people, they think I'm lying, and I literally have him on video drinking that many. And about 3 weeks in, he'd taken off drinking. He was gone for a couple of days, finally came back, and I, of course, I'm said, where have you been? I'm taking care of twins, by myself. Where have you been? And he came up to me and tried to break my arm, told me that he would, and I had my son in my arms at the time, and tried to break my arm, and I was on the phone with 911, and there's transcripts of so many different things that happened. I mean, there were literally, I didn't realize how many there were until I had to put together that 20-page document. And that was really hard. It was something else. So he tried to break my arm that night, and the police came, and he was escorted to a hotel because I wouldn't press charges. And I remember the officer, she was so nice. She said, they don't get better. And I remember her words. And I was spinning, where do I go? What do I do? I've just had twins. He controls all the finances. What do I do? And, I stayed. They escorted him to a hotel. His alcohol level, I think that night, was 0.147. So I'd gone out and stuck it out. And a little while later, he's very affluent. There's a very well-documented home in Lake Tahoe. I think it's valued at $2 million now, that was built from scratch. And I built it. I did all the lease agreements for it, and I was beaten there really, really badly. He had gone out, and I was still nursing the children. We'd gone out, but obviously I wasn't drinking because I was nursing the children, and I loved doing it. But believe it or not, I was good at it, and I loved doing it. It was such an honor to do that. And he began to drink severely. I had come home, I expressed, and went to bed. And about 3 a.m, woke up, and he was slumped over the baby, drunk. He'd passed out drunk, and he had woken up the baby at about 3 a.m. and to give him a feeding so that he wouldn't wake up. And I absolutely believe in God, because I woke up thinking something was wrong. And my mom's instinct said, get out there. And sure enough, he was slumped drunk over the baby and was smothering the baby, and the baby was squirming underneath him. And I woke him up. What are you doing? What's going on? He took the baby by one arm, and this was a 2-story cabin, and with rock stairs. And he took the baby by one arm and ran down the stairs to the 2nd level of the home. And I went chasing after him, going, give me the baby back, just give me the baby back. And he threw the baby on the bed in the downstairs bedroom and threw the baby down so he could proceed to beat my head. And he took my head and smashed it up against the door jamb. And that was I think there's the arrest records on the Google Drive. And there's this giant contusion on my head. And Child Protective Services came after that. They arrested him that night. His alcohol level was again at, I think 5 hours later, it was a 0.11. And what most people don't know is when you're arrested, and if it's a felony act, that record goes into the Department of Justice records. And I'm so grateful for that, because it gave validity to our story. And the police arrested him. And about 5 days later, I got a letter from the district attorney's office. They released him, and they would not be pressing charges because there was, and I quote, insufficient evidence.
So hold it right there, because these are the things that I want to emphasize, but I also want to add right now, and that's why I keep stopping at certain points to emphasize the specifics of the other side, the people in the positions of authority. But just to the Facebook viewers that are watching right now, I apologize. Sometimes this gets stopped and we're going back, but we have a full recording that's going to be edited through the TV station and then aired later on TV, and then the full edited one of this you know, from the beginning to end. If you missed anything, because I know it got cut off a couple times, just know that you will have the full one, and I do apologize. If this gets cut off, it will resume again, and that's what's happened. So I thank you guys for getting back on and listening to the rest of this. And I want to go back to Nina. Give it a second. It's going over to you. Okay. Nina, please emphasize again. Say again what the district. Hold on. It's knocking me off. Hold on. It just knocked me off again. Here we go. It's resuming. Because they're watching and they're staying on live here. I apologize for that. It's kicking back in again. And here we go. On. No. It has completely knocked us off. Here we go. And we're resuming. There we go. And they're going to get back on. So I apologize. And here we are back with Nina. So go ahead, Nina. Now, so what happened is now after all of this horror, even with the arrest and the felony and the Department of Justice having that information, the district attorney, and you could go ahead and say the county of that district attorney and state.
So the majority of this took place in Placer County, California. And it was absolutely shocking. And what most people don't realize is that, you know, most of the prosecutors and district attorneys do get access to that NCI record, that the NCI see. And what's really interesting is every time someone, a perpetrator, has a incident with the police, even if they aren't arrested, it still goes into this amazing record system that I believe should be public information. And I believe that they should make it a federal mandate for everyone to have this information.
Yes.
The thing that was interesting is even though they had that information, there were no injuries on, of course, as a domestic violence perpetrator, he immediately came back and said, well, she was hitting me. There were no injuries marked on him or in any of the previous arrests where each time he had said, both with me and with his previous victim, that there were marks on him and that the other person had come after him. And in this particular case, we had pictures and evidence, and there were no marks on him. I did not strike him in any way, shape, or form. I was just trying to get my child. And the thing that was really interesting is I got a nice letter, but the district attorney said that they could not prosecute. And I remember thinking when I got the letter, at that point, the contusion on my head, I'd had a concussion, I was vomiting, but I couldn't go to the hospital because that was going to get me in more trouble. And I had twins. What was I going to do? You know, I got that letter, and I remember thinking, and to this day, I always put my hair to this side because that's where all the head injuries took place. And if you look really closely, you can kind of see there's still a nice, great dent on my head. And most people don't notice when you meet a domestic violence victim that I part my hair on that side because that's where most of the injuries occurred, was on that side of my head. Most people don't notice that when I smile like this because it hides these chipped teeth that I just need to go get fixed. One of the worst things that happened is it got progressively worse, and there was this Child Protective Services worker, and it was interesting. At the time, I didn't recognize her tactic was trying to save my life, but it can be a really traumatic thing that a lot of domestic violence victims go through. As a Child Protective Services worker is showing up at your house saying you're in trouble because you're not protecting your children. And in a lot of domestic violence cases, the Child Protective Services worker is trying to scare that person into leaving their abuser. And at the time, I didn't recognize it. I just remember thinking, I am reaching out for help, and Lord, why is this woman yelling at me? What's going on? And it turns out that woman was trying to save our lives. And I didn't recognize it until a long time afterwards. But as you know, most domestic violence victims end up going on to trial themselves. And I could have lost the children because I didn't go to a safe house, because I didn't leave my abuser. And I went.
Can I say something in regards to that, though? We have many women who have left their abusers, and the judge has forced them to stay with the abuser or to share children with the abuser. So it's an absolute, you know, it's bizarre. But
Yeah, no, what was really interesting is in each of the police incidents, there was some very specific wording in there about offering the children and I shelter and to go to a safe house. And that's really incredibly important in our story because of what happened later. So there were two more incidences, one of which we were going back up to Tahoe. And by this stage, the kids are about, I think, maybe 6 to 9 months old. We were going back up to Tahoe, and he went back into the house to drink, which was normal, and I would usually drive, and he would go back into the house and drink for about 30 to 45 minutes. And we'd be sitting in the car waiting and waiting and, waiting for him to stop drinking, and he would say he had to close up the house. On this particular occasion, he was retaliating because I had contacted the police, and I'd never done that before. And he left stakes out in the house. And we were going to be and this was summertime, and we were going to be in Tahoe for a week. We came back, and the entire house was filled with maggots and flies. And bear in mind, I have young children, and there's maggots and flies all over the floor. And when we walked in, he said it was my fault because I had distracted him and pushed my nose and face down into it, cracked my nose again and my teeth, and made me eat the maggots, and refused to contact extermination, and said that I had to clean it all up. And then it just got worse. A little while later, he had put me and strangled me. Someone merely made a point of telling me the difference between choking and strangling. Choking is when you're choking on a chicken bone, and strangling is when someone is trying to, end your life. And he, again, put me into a chokehold because I told him I'd had enough and it was time for him to leave. And he put me into a chokehold, and I remember this wonderful officer, he said, "Why don't you just leave? How many times have we been out here? Why don't you just leave?" And he was yelling at me, and he was trying to scare me into getting me to leave, and I didn't recognize it then, and now I realize he was trying to save my life. And I remember he was so angry because he said, "Don't you want to press charges this time?" And I said, "It won't matter because he'll get off again."
Right.
And they left, and I remember he said, "You can leave right now. We have a shelter for you." And ironically, Placer County, California does have a beautiful shelter, as I later learned. So at that point, the Child Protective Services worker came out, and they removed custody. There was a juvenile detention hearing, and the kids were placed under the care of the state of California and awarded into my care. And the respondent in this particular case actually lost custody of the children for about 1.5 years, went through the batterers program, which, if you don't know, is the world's biggest joke. What I found out later, especially in Placer County, California, this was the 3rd time he had been to either batterers or anger management courses over the course of about 15 years. And the worst part is that they actually were teaching him ways to get through the system. If you tell the judge this, if you tell the judge that, if you tell the judge this. And so what he started to do is to tell me what to say, and we have it in emails, where he was trying to say, if you just tell her this, the Child Protective Services will go away. If you tell her this, the Child Protective Services worker will go away. Because that was what he had learned in that class. They were teaching him not how to stop this violent behavior, but he had come back and bragged about it. And I was offered a house. If I stopped pressing charges, and if I didn't tell anyone, I was offered an even bigger, larger house in Elk Grove, California. And the nightmare from there just really didn't stop. I hired an attorney, got a restraining order, and eventually, of course, as most batterers do, they work their way through the system. And he was allowed to have visits. And I remember thinking, he's absolutely hammered. And he would show up to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
He was allowed to have supervised visits, right? Not unsupervised.
Believe it or not, at first, they were not supervised.
Well,
So
I knew that was your answer. That's why I just wanted to emphasize that. But go ahead.
yeah, you know, right? And
So I was being my sarcastic self. Go ahead.
no, I love it. No, it really is, because you know, that sarcasm kind of helps you get through,
Yeah.
you know, some of the worst things in the world. And so, you know, we'd have a witness and video, and he would show up drunk, and he would have the children for a short visit, maybe an hour or two, and would go immediately and go and drink, and then was witnessed screaming, yelling, throwing things, hurting the car. Eventually went to court, and court says, well, tell you what, we'll make him do a breathalyzer when he comes to pick up the kids or drop them off. What I didn't know was that that was supposed to take place at a supervised facility with someone who is licensed to do that and look for the signs of substance abuse. What he had convinced everyone to do was, oh, you know, I'll blow into a breathalyzer, sure. So I got an over-the-counter breathalyzer, and he would show up at the police department multiple times, throwing things, screaming at me, cursing and swearing at the children, breaking things off my vehicle. And there were, especially in 2013 and 2014, probably I think about 18 police reports. And
tons of them.
Yeah, just tons of them. And he would show up, he would blow into the breathalyzer, it would test positive for alcohol, and it was either bringing them or coming back, and at the police station. And you call the police, and they would try and find him so he wouldn't injure someone else because he was above the legal limit.
Right.
And multiple times, I think I had requested 4 separate restraining orders because he kept coming to the house. He kept severing alarm wires. He had slashed my tires. Somebody had put a box cutter in my tire at the courthouse. And I found out where the cameras are at the courthouse very quickly, right? And after that, of course, I would have bailiffs escort me. And at the time, I had a boyfriend who was a police officer, and he had agreed to come to court. We had asked for the first legal move away, which was in a county that was 1 hour away, and still had great services for my son, who at this point was autistic. I cannot even tell you what the system put me through, because my son, when he manifested and his autism manifested, it was a nightmare. He went completely nonverbal. He was banging his head on the concrete floor. It was a really bad case, and I was able to get him into the early intervention program with some amazing doctors, down in Placer County and Sacramento, California, that were just amazing. The doctors at Kaiser did such a phenomenal job with my children. And the thing that was most interesting was I had gone to the domestic violence classes, and I was chastised because I didn't go to counseling services. And I went, I'm a single mom. I have one child who has just been diagnosed with severe autism, and the other child, they really weren't sure if she was autistic at the time. And of course, my ex-husband had still continued to threaten, to abuse, to slash tires, to sever alarm wires. One stage it came back, and somebody had tried to break into the side garage door with a crowbar. I mean, it was literally not quite daily, but about every other day something bad would happen. And there would be a mocking text message or an email, threats to evict us from the house, threats to take away the car. And I had asked for a legal move away. I had said, this is enough. I'm being threatened every single day. The kids and I deserve a normal, calm life where he can still have visitation, but I at least get an hour's notice if he's going to come and kill me. And the court refused to allow a move away. But they allowed me to stay in the home. So I was a sitting target. We would come back, and he had even started to thrash the car that was there. And I can't even tell you, there were hundreds of incidences that kept happening. And the worst part was he was still continuing to bring back the kids. And then eventually, of course, as most batterers do, he got visitation, unsupervised. We were at supervised visitation, and the kids were coming back with severe injuries, most of which I think you've seen on the Google Drive. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to share that Google Drive with anyone that asks. The story is horrific. They would come back blistered,
Yeah, and I'm going to say something about that. Before I do any of these interviews, I get people's documentation. These are never ever mothers that are making things up. They don't get on the air until I've got the information. So I want to make that clear in this footage as well. And also, what angers me, what you just said, is that see, this is something that truly bothers me, and our nation needs to stop this. Our nation needs to stop this, because these judges should not be judging in any way, shape, or form. And our civil liberties are being violated, and people don't seem to understand that our human, parental, our human rights, our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are violated. She couldn't move away an hour. Could you imagine that she couldn't? You should never be told that you can't move 5 feet or 50,000 feet from your home and find your own home. Since when and why? Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just a nightmare. I mean, just having your entire life, it was just a nightmare. At the time, yeah, one of the worst things that would happen was you'd get a restraining order, and there were 4 that were requested, and there was substantial evidence that was produced, all of which is on that Google Drive, and you would get it temporarily, and because he was a master manipulator of the system, he would file what's called a DV-120 in the state of California, and eventually would get it reduced down to a stay away. So then when he would come back in and try and break into the house again or try and do something, he knew what to say to the police. And he would say, I'm just under a stay away. The judge would never give her a restraining order. And I remember thinking to myself, that isn't quite what happened. The restraining order, they knew, and they knew that they didn't have enough. You know, it was all circumstantial. We didn't know that who had severed the alarm wires, or had removed all the magnets, or who had tampered with the vehicle, or who had put a box cutter in my tire. You know, I mean, the stuff that had happened was just amazing. Threats all the time. And you would get it, it would get reduced, and then something more substantial would happen. He did not pay child support, of course, and they had to go after him for child support, and I was trying to survive. And I had to stay at home because my son was in therapy for 40 hours. You know, what was I going to do? I had to get my son better, and they didn't know if my daughter had it. One of the worst things that happened as a result of this particular judge in this case was, they refused to acknowledge, even with mountains of evidentiary proof, the alcoholism that happened with the respondent and the long-term history. There were also medical files. Eventually, he's ordered to go out, and each of the mediators in this case wrote very specifically. There were 6 different mediators that have been through this case. Each of them wrote very specifically, and the thing that's most critical about this case, none of them had access to his arrest records or his medical records. And I would bring them with me, and the mediator would say, I can't look at that unless the court allows me to.
Yep.
You've got to be kidding me.
No,
and
what's going on all over our country. They don't look at evidence. They refuse evidence. They don't want you to bring it in. They can see it and they pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah. One of the most critical things in each of those, it said, if the allegations of alcohol abuse and domestic violence are true, co-parenting is not possible. And every one of them had that phrase in there. Eventually,
I just got kicked off again.
Oh no.
We keep losing. Good, but you can just keep going because we're still rolling. So
one of the things that was most critical in this particular case was the children's medical records. And not only that, but as this time went on, each of the mediators recommended a 7:30 psych eval for the respondent. And each time, and you're talking 6 separate times, each time the children were awarded in my primary care, I was given psych evals, which I passed. And of course, you know, I have no mental health history. I've never done drugs of any kind. I have no arrest record, etc. And it was just absolutely shocking because they never ordered it for him.
So they only ordered it for you, and then just to reiterate, they only re-abused you, and then they also said that if they admit that he's got these problems, then we can't have 50-50 parenting.
That's
But
exactly
they
it.
actually had the nerve to tell you. Wow. Okay.
It wasn't until I literally had federal agents coming up to me at church, calling me on the phone and telling me what to file against the judges in this particular case.
Now,
And
now this is actually the light at the end of the tunnel. And before you go
yeah,
into the portion, because we only have a 30-minute, and I apologize, because believe me,
no,
this
no,
is something that probably could take a couple of hours, and it's
yeah, go on.
all
Yeah,
it's all very important, and the audience needs to hear it. But I do want to go on to this portion, because what happened with you, and you're so blessed, and I'm so happy to hear this. But if it wasn't for the fact that you had these people in your church, because I
yeah,
have women all over the place, and men too, that have filed with the Department of Justice and the FBI and so on and so forth, and their children are still in vital danger.
yeah.
And we've got amazing problems in Ulster County, and it's all ignored. But so if you could, can you get into that portion of the story so we can not
Uh,
miss? And I don't want to.
Absolutely.
No,
So
no,
I
no.
hope that this is a story of hope for a lot of people, even though right now we're at the deepest part, but we're coming back out. And so one of the things that's most interesting was yeah, the things that happened in that courtroom. Eventually, I walked away from everything. I walked away from over $8 million in real estate, businesses, et cetera, and I walked away for my safety. And I had a bunch of wonderful, we're just going to call them angels, people coming up to me and saying, just walk away. Then he has no reason to come after you. I moved, and he demanded to know the address, and I begged the court. I said, please, I keep a beautiful home. I had mandated reporters at my house daily, because remember, my son is autistic, so he was receiving therapy and services, and so BCBAs and psychologists were in my home daily. They're trained to look for signs of mental illness in parents. They're also trained to look for signs of abuse. Most of my friends were mandated reporters and wrote letters of reference to the court. One of the worst things that happened was I went in, and the abuses that happened in that court system, he kept breaking in, and he hired this really unscrupulous attorney who did what's called slap action. And in many states, they have something called anti-slap, where it prevents the domestic violence victim from being harassed in court. And they have measures called anti-slap. And you're going to look it up later, and it's SLAPP. And it's the most interesting thing in the world, because they're not supposed to be able to send you to court 100 times in a year, because any parent wouldn't be able to survive that. How would you pay your bills?
They're not supposed to do what? I'm sorry,
they're not supposed to. What I begged them to find him as a vexatious litigant, because it was clear they were making things up. Anything could be said in court. It was defamation of my personal character, and everyone in the community knew.
We've all been put through that. Yes,
yeah,
But what did you say about 100 times? They're not allowed to.
I had begged them to find them as vexatious litigants and put in a filing for that, and they did not do it, which would have stopped that level of harassment. And it got so bad that the case drew the attention of some very wonderful government agencies. And they were trying to reach out to me, and I didn't trust anyone at that point. I really didn't. And, they were reaching out to me, and they were making it painfully obvious which agencies they were working for. And I just remember thanking God for it, but not trusting it at all at the same time. And I went into a safe house. I went in and, had said, that's enough. This is getting really dangerous. He's not stopping. And I went into a safe house in February of 2016. His attorney immediately turned around and filed an emergency injunction, got it from a visiting judge who has retired. And the thing that was really interesting is a whole lot of people noticed those maneuvers she was doing, and a whole lot of people were watching the case very, very closely. And she filed this emergency injunction, and I lost custody of the kids because I took them into a safe house to protect all of us.
Okay, now we got cut off, and they're getting back on again. I'm going to have you hold that thought. Once we got cut off, and here they come. They're coming back on again. She just said that because she went into a safe house, she lost custody. Go ahead.
His attorney went out after doing all these vexatious filings that everyone in the community knew they weren't true, and they went out, and we went into the safe house. They were telling us, look, this guy's going to kill you. Get into the safe house now and get into the shelter where you'll be safe. And at the time, these wonderful angels and people were trying to get me moved, and I didn't know it behind the scenes. And to this day, it's the first time I've talked publicly about it because I had been in hiding. And I went into court, and I had asked for a legal move away to move to another state. And I had said, I have tried everything to co-parent with this person. All of my son's autism services had been stopped because of this response participation. He had been bringing them back with head lice for 2 years with injuries, and it got so bad that the children's pediatrician in Placer County, California, was noted of record. And they hired a mediator, and the mediator is also on record. And scarily enough, this mediator is still and ordered a psych eval for me. I had to pay.
They ordered another psych eval for you. Nothing.
Another psych eval because, of course, I'm a mentally ill flight risk. Can't you tell?
Right. Oh, every woman becomes a flight risk when they're being abused and they're trying to protect their children. But do you know that also your ADA rights were violated because if he has autism and they took him away from a primary caretaker, that's an ADA violation to both of you. But go ahead.
Yeah, the number of federal violations were so amazing. Yeah, the thing that was really amazing was, so then he hires this crooked mediator, hires a crooked psychologist. And what's really interesting is there's a woman named Kathleen Russell at the Center of Judicial Excellence that's fighting this right now in the state of California. And God bless her and her amazing work.
What is her name again? Can you say her name again?
Kathleen Russell, the Center for Judicial Excellence. And they've done some amazing work out here in California, just phenomenal.
Just for California though, or any other states, or could she refer?
They're starting with California, but I think it's gone pretty. Her reach is getting pretty long. It started out. It's an amazing case. I strongly recommend everybody go onto their website because it talks about it. But one of the things that they're pushing for, along with a guy named Joe Sweeney, they're pushing on the steps of the California state to go out and get judicial oversight of the judicial committee that reviews judicial performance in cases like ours.
That is wonderful, and that is actually part of why we're doing a live one with you as well, because this is going on, as you know. I mean, what you've been through is absolutely hellish, and I commend you for your faith, and I'm so glad that you kept your faith through the whole thing, because God is good. Yeah. And people have a hard time understanding how we keep saying God is good through this. It makes them marvel, but that's part of our faith. But it
really is. Yeah, and I think I hope that when I share my story, I always knew God had a purpose for this. Why, and I would question him, God, why are you putting me this? Why did you put this tremendous mountain on my shoulders? And I realized there was a reason. There's a
big reason, because there's so many suffering and so many children suffering. Somebody has to be the Moseses to take them through the Red Sea.
Absolutely. So to make it quick, I put in for a legal move away that allowed for visitation with the respondent because at that point my son had not received autism services. I had asked for a legal move away, and I had asked that my address be kept confidential. And even though we had a letter with mandated reporters, references from all of my references, they had arranged for me to have an amazing job where I would be safe and also get an amazing education, just incredible. And at that point, I lost complete custody. And the thing that was really sneaky was they went out and I didn't receive it until after the appeal period had expired. Didn't get it by email, didn't get any notification of it until the appeal period had expired.
I know all the tactics too well.
It was this particular judge, this female judge, it absolutely has to be taken off of the family court bench in Placer County, California. What she did in my particular case, the worst part was she ignored all of the children's medical records, did not once contact any of it, ignored the arrest record history of the respondent. And we would come up with a normal visitation schedule that still allowed for a relationship with the respondent, but encouraged sobriety and him getting into a treatment program. The number of failures in this case it's literally 20 pages long. The worst part was that then somehow the respondent in this particular case filed something saying it was emotionally damaging for me to talk to my children. And I was restricted to 3 calls per week of 15 minutes each, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. and he would dodge the call time around. So now it's at the point where I speak to my children 15 minutes a day. And I was literally on the board of my mom's club. I was a normal parent. The worst part is that having to do video chats with my children and watching him abuse the children during those calls, chasing after them, screaming at them.
Because this got kicked off again, I'm just going to have her reiterate what she just said. And they just got back on, and I thank everybody. And if everyone can let other people know that when it gets kicked off, we do resume it again. For those of them that did not know that, could you please repeat what just happened, what you just said, because they missed that last part. What they did to you, what this judge,
the things that this particular court did were absolutely shocking, because of course they had no idea that I had been moved for my safety. Most people didn't. They thought the worst of me. They thought the worst of my character. And I remember thinking, I have to forgive them because they didn't know the truth. And
that's not
the funniest thing is that I went out. As soon as I started my new job and my fresh start at life, they went out and had a filing done saying that the calls were too emotionally disturbing to my children. And that the calls be restricted to 3 times per week of 20 minutes, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They had my wages garnished, so I now have to pay the person that tried to kill me over $2,500, and I'm paying $800 a month in insurance. That he has never taken the children to their pediatrician. The pediatricians have not seen them. There has been no autism services for my son now for going on 2 years. And the worst part was watching them being abused on video.
This is during your 3 times per week video.
3 times per week. And I just kept calling. I wasn't going to give up. And I called every single night for up to 2 hours from 7 to 9 p.m. every night.
He ignored you, and the judge ignored all this overwhelming abuse. Overwhelming abuse.
I can't even imagine. And the threats that came in from the respondent in this particular case, threats to cut off the children, threats to hurt the children. On video, we have him saying that it's my fault for calling the kids, and it's my fault as he hurt my son. Threw him down in a chair. My son was crying. I can't even tell you how many times he pulled him off camera, threatened him, and we have the video. And I can't even tell you the things that he's done to the children, but the video was extremely disturbing.
Well, I
finally,
I can imagine just by the things that he's done to you, and he should not be anywhere within the vicinity of any children, let alone his own. Actually, he should be behind bars with the judge. I have to get it to the point of what is happening now. Otherwise, we're going to lose the content of this interview, and I do apologize.
Absolutely. So this is the time. This is, I've gone through the world's deepest valley, and I finally decided enough is enough, and I'm going back and fighting. And I'm using social media because I think people need to be aware that, there is such an injustice going on right now. But the worst part is having the children, forget about what happened to me. That was bad enough. Forget about what happened to his first wife. He's out there drinking and driving and abusing my children. And the worst part is that right now, as recently as about 3 weeks ago, I came down to do the emergency court filing, and I got brave. And I was so excited. I went, and I've driven down now 12 times or flown down to see the children. I've not seen them since November 28th. And I've never, he's blocked all contact with the children. And
so they gave him sole custody and you phone calls.
They gave him sole custody against all the recommendations and eventually the court ruling was that I should have supervised visits. The thing that was really interesting, especially in Sacramento and Placer County, is the just pure corruption that's happening down there. And it's actually, there have been 2 really great articles about it. One was in the Sacramento News and Review, and I think the other one was in the Sacramento Bee, highlighting this corruption and what's going on down there. Just incredibly bad. And I'll be posting those articles as well to help spread that message out of this is a really huge problem. One of the worst things that happened was he intentionally gave them head lice again so that the visitation would get canceled. So I would drive down 14 hours to come and see my children, and the visitation would get canceled. And the worst part was, is these two places that I went were the only ones I could find and the only ones he would agree to. Turns out that his attorney had them in the back pocket. The first one examined my children, and the children had head lice. She lied and said, no, they don't. They don't have head lice. And on Monday morning, the kids went to school, and guess what the school nurse found? Head lice, intentionally given to them with huge infestations. This would be impossible for anyone to not notice. They threatened to kill me or come after me or hurt the children at least 27 times. I've honestly lost count of the number of text messages. In the last 2 months alone, I think I've received at least 27 threats. Doing this interview may get me killed.
And they're doing absolutely nothing with these threats. They're doing nothing with the physical assaults, nothing with the beatings. They're doing, except the court gave your children sole custody to this man.
Well,
this is unbelievable. I mean, I understand it because I see it every day. I hear it every day.
Yeah, you do.
But this is absolutely, absolutely unbelievable. And this man is so insane. He's known as a felon in the Department of Justice and has her children. He's beat her to, I mean, because anybody that missed this in the beginning, and they didn't have enough evidence on him with bruises and you name it, police reports and everything else, drunken, obliterated drunk, okay? And he has her children, and the one child has definite autism, which is an ADA violation all over the place. The Department of Justice should grab them immediately and return them to you.
Well, that's my hope, is that we can go down and say, look, we've tried all of these efforts. You know, right now, the thing that's really interesting is that no judge, either in my home state, I had to file a restraining order because the threats were getting so bad. One of the things that was really interesting was on July 4th, I'd come down to the state, and I wasn't even in the state for more than an hour, and the threats began immediately. We have him on video threatening for 45 minutes in a drunken rave, and I just called and asked to speak to the children. I had said, I'm calling to speak to my children. It was the call night. I was calling at the call time. It was court ordered. And that night, my vehicle was tampered with, and he'd loosened the lug nuts, or someone had loosened the lug nuts on the vehicle, took the wheel weights off, did something to the gas tank, and overfilled the oil tank by over 10 gallons. And it was ironic because I had an oil change about 2 weeks before the trip, so no need to even look at it. And they found the lug nut wrench inside of the vehicle, the compartment. The tow truck driver and the sheriff's office in El Dorado County found it. And then someone had let the dog out, and the phone started ringing off the hook. Someone let the dog out, and the dog was found dead the following day. And then July 7th, called to speak to the children, and my parents have not seen the children in 2 years. And my stepmom is a retired Navy SEAL secretary. We're totally normal family. And it's just the most interesting thing, because they wanted to speak to the children. They hadn't seen them since December of 2015. And we called for a video chat, and he picked up the phone from a bar, and he was talking to a girl, and he picked it up so we could hear it. And he picked up the phone and said he had just gotten back from the town that I live in now, and he was going back again to finish the job once and for all. And that was on July 7th. And we have a recording of that call as well, and nothing but threats since then. And
I think at this point you need to go to a federal court and file a lawsuit, and you need to file your ADA rights for you and your children, and you need to file for full custody that way, because this is absolutely, I mean, I hear all of them. I've been doing this for a long time. I know how insane these courts are, but I have to say, this does put the icing on the cake, and they're all bad. They're all bad.
They are all bad. I've heard some
bad, but this is really and unbelievable. So you are in protective housing though, as we speak. Is that correct?
Not anymore. So one of the things that's nice is the state that I'm in now. They had offered. I had some really great people that were staying at the house to keep me safe. And I had said, it's time to go and protect the next one. I'm feeling brave. And I got some amazing training. And they've kept me and gotten me in an amazing position where I'm very, very safe, and get a lot of incredible opportunities to work with some incredible government agencies, and the opportunities are just limitless for me now. And I have the Department of Justice to thank for that. They saved my life, absolutely. So I could do this fight, and I'm alive because they didn't look away. And I know in my heart that the reason that our family had to go through all of this was so that it will be a story of inspiration for others to never give up fighting. And this is the day that I tell people what happened, that, hey, the reason you haven't heard from me is I've been in hiding. And I've gotten some amazing training. I'm able to go out and have my concealed carry permit here. And I hope I never, ever, ever have to use that thing. But it sure is great to know, because in my home state, I couldn't even get that. And here was this person actively trying to kill me, and who had issued death threats to his previous spouse and has been abusing the children. And I couldn't get a weapon to protect myself. I couldn't even carry pepper spray legally by the definition of the law in California state. And to me, that was just ridiculous. And even as we speak, I had filed for a protective order here in my home state, and he's been fighting it, and it's really disturbing. I sat through some cases here that I would never imagine I would see in the state, that there were some scary things going on. And again, there's another court system that we have to keep an eye out for. Some really disturbing stuff, but I hope that the story gives people hope, because this is the day that I start fighting.
Yes, and I'm so proud of you, and you are an amazing encouragement. And I'm just glad that you found, I'm glad you found us so that we could do this for you and for all those that are watching, and will be inspired by your amazing testimony, and your faith in God, because that's above all. And to go through what you've been through, it just proves that there is a God, because it shows that, that your faith is still in him. So that's wonderful. And that's part of your testimony that I think is wonderful. I want to just know that we're all going to continue to pray for your children and this immediate return to you, because that's where they belong, and their immediate return to all the good parents out there that are suffering this barbaric atrocity. They're sending you a lot of hearts and love from the Facebook Live. I know you can't see it right now, but I can't thank you enough, and I wish we could stay on longer, but I only get a certain amount of time. But we're as soon as you get your kids back, we're going to blast it all over the place. Everybody knows, but keep her in prayer too, because we all, we're all in the same boat. That, well, actually, they're all in the boat. And we're not going to rock it. We're going to tip that thing right over. So, but thank you again so much, Nina, and God bless you. And we really, really appreciate having you. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Well, that wraps it right now, and I just want to say thank you all for watching. And if you want to be on our show, you would just go to my website, which is www.punished4beingaparent.com. Punished for beingaparent.com. Boy, does that name fitting. Punished for being a parent. I guess I named that right. Thank you all, and have a great night.